The morning of my baby shower, I stood in my kitchen at 7 a.m. reviewing the catering invoice, the rental receipt for the white garden chairs, and the folded list of 83 names I had spent 3 weeks confirming. My husband had driven to pick up the flower arrangements. My mother-in-law was bringing the cake. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. My sister showed up 2 hours early. I heard her car in the driveway before I saw her. That particular sound, her old Civic with the loose exhaust, had been triggering something in my chest since I was about 12 years old. Not fear exactly, more like bracing. The way you brace before something cold hits you. She knocked once and walked in, which she had always done, and I noticed immediately that she was already in a bad mood. The kind she wore on her face the way other people wear a hat, something tight around her eyes, her jaw slightly forward. "You could have warned me the parking was going to be a disaster out there," she said, dropping her bag on my kitchen counter. I had not asked her to come early. I had not asked her to come at all, if I'm being honest with myself. But she was my sister, and she was already there. And I was 31 weeks pregnant, and I had learned a long time ago that certain battles cost more than they're worth. "There's plenty of street parking," I said. She opened my refrigerator without asking. Her name is Renee. She is 4 years older than me, and for most of my life I believed the age gap explained everything. Why she got to make the rules, why her opinion mattered more, why our mother always said she's just being protective in that tone that made it clear the conversation was over. But Renee is 34 now, and I am 30, and I have been waiting for the age gap to stop explaining things, and it hasn't yet. I grew up watching my sister receive. She received attention, second chances, explanations, patience. She received the benefit of every doubt our parents had to give. I grew up watching that and telling myself it was fine. It was just how families worked. Some people needed more, and that didn't mean you were loved less. I told myself that for about 23 years. What I know now, standing in the kitchen of the house I own, waiting for guests to arrive at the baby shower I planned and paid for myself, is that I was wrong. Being loved less does not mean being loved less openly. Sometimes it just means being loved less openly. My husband Brian had come back with the flowers by 9. He set them on the dining table and kissed me on the cheek and whispered that everything looked beautiful, and I believed him. The backyard was strung with pale yellow lights. The catering team was setting up the food stations along the fence. My friend Trisha had come early to help arrange the gift table, and she was doing that thing she does where she hums quietly while she works, which I have always found enormously comforting. Renee was on the back porch with a mimosa she had poured herself from the pitcher meant for guests. I noticed her watching Brian carry the second box of flowers inside. I noticed the way she watched him. Not with warmth. More like she was calculating something. She and Brian had never gotten along. He is calm, precise. The kind of man who thinks before he speaks and means what he says. Renee has always read those qualities as arrogance. She once told my mother that Brian thought he was better than everyone. My mother had relayed this to me casually over the phone, as though it were simply interesting information and not a grenade she was dropping into my marriage. Brian had been nothing but respectful to Renee for 6 years. The respect was not returned. Guests started arriving at 11. My college roommate, my coworkers, my mother-in-law with a cake in a white box that she was carrying with both hands and enormous concentration. My aunt drove up from Charlottesville. My neighbor brought her daughter, who is 7 and very serious about gift wrapping and had selected the paper herself. My mother arrived at 11:15. She hugged me long and said I looked radiant, which I appreciated, and then she immediately found Renee and they moved to a corner together in that way they have always had, a gravitational pull between them that I had spent 30 years pretending not to notice. The afternoon was, for a while, actually good. I sat in the decorated chair my mother-in-law had set up for me, and I opened gifts and I read the cards out loud and I laughed at the right moments and I felt genuinely happy. Brian sat nearby. Trisha kept refilling my water glass without being asked. The food was excellent. The weather held. I was in the middle of unwrapping a gift, a hand-knitted blanket from my aunt, soft gray with a small yellow border, when I heard Renee's voice cut across the yard. "Must be nice," she said, loudly, to no one in particular. I looked up. She was standing near the drink table, third mimosa in hand, staring at the gift pile. Her face had passed through something and come out the other side. Must be really nice, she said again, to have everyone fall all over themselves for you. The yard got quiet the way yards do when something shifts. My mother moved toward her immediately. That was reflex. 20 years of watching that reflex. Renee makes a scene, my mother moves toward her, not toward me. And Renee becomes the center of gravity. Renee, honey, no, I'm just saying. She gestured with her glass in a wide arc that sent mimosa over the rim. She's always been the favorite, always, and nobody ever wants to talk about it. But I'm talking about it. My aunt said her name quietly. One of my coworkers had taken out her phone and was looking at it with the focused attention of someone who desperately wants to be somewhere else. Brian stood up. Renee, he said in that calm voice I had fallen in love with, maybe let's take a break from the mimosas. She turned to him. Later, I would think about what she might have done differently. There were 100 ways that moment could have gone. She could have laughed it off. She could have gone inside. She could have said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll get some water." She had been given that kind of off-ramp 100 times in her life, and she had never once taken it. She threw her glass at him. Not at him exactly. She was drunk enough that her aim was poor. The glass hit the edge of the gift table and shattered, and the remaining mimosa sprayed across 3 of the gifts, including the gray blanket my aunt had knitted, and the sound of the glass breaking was the sound of the afternoon ending. Then Renee picked up the closest thing to her, which was the centerpiece from the drink table, a tall glass vase with white hydrangeas, and she threw that too. It hit Brian in the shoulder. He stepped back. His shirt was soaked. My mother made a sound I cannot describe. My aunt stood up. Renee was breathing hard, staring at Brian, and then she turned to me and said, "You've always used him to make me feel like nothing. You've always done that. You think just because you have the house and the perfect husband and the baby that you're better than me. You're not. You've never been." I did not say anything. I looked at her. I looked at my mother, who was standing next to Renee with her hand on Renee's arm. And I looked at the expression on my mother's face, which was not anger, was not horror, was something else, something close to sympathy, directed at Renee who had just thrown a vase at my husband at my baby shower, and something inside me went very quiet. Not the angry kind of quiet. The other kind. The kind where you've been waiting for something to be true and it finally becomes undeniable. My mother looked at me and said, "She's overwhelmed. She's been having a really hard time lately." She said it gently, the way you say something you expect to be received. "I know," I said. And I did know. I just didn't care anymore. The guests left within the hour. Trisha stayed to help clean up without me asking. My mother-in-law, who had not said a word during the incident, but whose face had communicated a complete paragraph, quietly packaged the leftover food into containers. My aunt had rinsed off the gray blanket in the laundry sink and set it to dry over the porch railing without saying anything about it. Brian changed his shirt. He did not say what he was thinking. He asked me 3 times if I was okay, and I said yes each time, and he believed me each time, which is one of his few blind spots where I'm concerned. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my phone and 2 documents I had been keeping updated for the past year and a half. The first was a shared cell phone plan. I had added Renee to my plan 4 years ago when she lost her job and couldn't afford her own contract. The plan was in my name. I was the primary account holder. I had been paying her portion, $42 a month, every single month for 4 years because she had asked me to, and because I had said yes, and because that is what I did. The second document was a co-signed personal loan. 2 years ago, Renee had needed $8,000 to cover a gap between jobs. She couldn't qualify a loan. She had asked me to co-sign. My mother had called me separately to ask me to co-sign. Brian had said it wasn't a good idea. I had done it anyway because I wanted to believe in a version of my family that didn't actually exist. She had been making payments, inconsistent ones. I had covered 2 of the missed payments myself, quietly, because a missed payment on a co-signed loan affects my credit, and I had not told Brian about either of them. I sat with those 2 documents for a long time. I thought about the gray blanket soaking in the laundry sink. I thought about Brian's expression when the vase hit his shoulder. Not angry, just tired. The face of a man who had been patient for a very long time. I thought about my mother's hand on Renee's arm and the word overwhelmed delivered in that particular tone. Then I made a phone call. I called my carrier's customer support line and I removed Renee from my cell plan, effective immediately. The representative was very helpful. The whole call took 11 minutes. Then I drafted an email to the loan servicers explaining that I would no longer be covering missed payments and requesting that all future communication regarding account delinquency be directed to the primary borrower. Then I drafted a message to Renee. It was not long. I'm removing you from my phone plan effective today. I'm also notifying the loan servicer that I won't be covering any future missed payments. Whatever happens with the loan from here is between you and them. I'm going to need some time away from our relationship. I hope you get some support. I sent all 3 things before midnight. I did not feel the way I thought I would feel. I thought I would feel guilty. I had been afraid of this particular guilt my entire adult life. The guilt of withdrawing from Renee, of not being the sister who absorbs things, of taking my hand away. I had organized a significant portion of my choices around avoiding that guilt. What I felt instead was something closer to stillness, like a sound I had learned to tune out had finally stopped. Renee called me at 7:45 the next morning. I did not answer. She called 3 more times. Then she called Brian. He answered, heard her out, and said, "She'll reach out when she's ready," and hung up. My mother called at 9. "I think you're being very reactive," she said. "I removed her from my phone plan," I said. "And I'm not covering her loan payments anymore. She's your sister. I know, she's going through something. She's been going through something for 15 years, I said. At some point that stops being a reason and starts being a pattern. My mother was quiet. Then she said, "I just think this isn't the right time. With the baby coming. The baby is exactly why it's the right time," I said. I had not planned to say that. But it was true, and once I said it, I understood it in a way I hadn't before. I was about to become responsible for a person who could not protect herself. And I had spent 30 years watching what happened to people in my family who couldn't protect themselves. I was not going to let my daughter grow up watching me absorb Renee the way I had absorbed her my whole life. Watching me make myself smaller to avoid a conflict. Watching my mother call it love. My mother said she needed time to process. I told her I understood. She called Renee instead. I know because Renee sent me a text that afternoon that said, "Mom told me what you said." I didn't respond. For 3 weeks, I didn't hear from Renee directly. My mother texted me twice, both times variations on the theme of, "Don't you think this has gone on long enough?" I was cordial and non-committal. What I did not know, in those 3 weeks, was that Renee had missed a loan payment. The servicer sent a notice. The notice came to my email, because the loan was co-signed under my information as well, and I read it carefully and I forwarded it to Renee with no comment. She called me that night. "You have to cover it," she said. "You always cover it." "I'm not going to do that," I said. "My credit, yes," I said. "And mine." "So you're just going to let my credit tank because you're still angry about the shower?" "I'm not angry," I said. And I wasn't. That was the thing she couldn't seem to understand. I had not made these decisions because I was angry. I had made them because I was finished. "You need to cover it," she said again. "No," I said. "I really don't." She hung up. My mother called the next morning to tell me Renee was devastated. I said I was sorry to hear that and that I hoped she'd make the payment. My mother said I was being cold. I said that was probably fair. What happened next I did not expect. Renee made the payment. She made it herself, on time, before the 30-day window closed. She had the money. She had had the money. She had simply never needed to use it before, because I was always there to catch her. My mother called to tell me this like it was news I should do something with. She handled it herself, my mother said, and her voice had something in it. Surprise, I think, and maybe a small amount of something she didn't want to name. "Good," I said. 6 weeks after the shower, Renee asked if she could come over. Not by phone. She texted. She said she wanted to talk, not to argue, and she asked if Brian could be there, which surprised me. We sat in the living room. Brian sat next to me. Renee sat across from us, and for the first time in my memory, she did not have the posture of someone about to defend something. She said she had started seeing a therapist. She said the therapist had asked her to describe the moment at the shower from my perspective, and that she had not been able to do it. That when she tried, she kept slipping back into her own experience, her own grievances, and that the therapist had pointed out that this was something worth paying attention to. She did not say she was sorry in the way people say it to end a conversation. She said it the way people say it when they've actually held the thing they did and looked at it. She looked at Brian and said, "I'm sorry I threw the vase at you. There's no version of that where I wasn't completely wrong." Brian nodded. He said, "I appreciate that." She looked at me and said, "I appreciate that." She looked at me and said, "I've been jealous of you for so long that I stopped noticing I was doing it. I just thought I was seeing things clearly. I thought you were the one being unfair." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I know. I think I've always known. I'm not asking you to just get over it," she said. "I know that's not how it works. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to see it." We didn't fix everything that afternoon. We didn't have a movie moment where the years of damage resolved into a warm understanding. I'm not interested in those moments anymore. What we had was an honest conversation, which was more than I had ever gotten from Renee in my entire life, and I wasn't going to pretend it was nothing. She still calls my mother more than she calls me. My mother still has a reflex toward her that she doesn't have toward me. Those things are true, and they will probably stay true. My daughter was born 11 weeks after that conversation. She has Brian's eyes and my mother's stubborn jaw, and she sleeps deeply in a way that makes me understand, for the first time in my life, what the word peaceful actually means when it applies to a body at rest. Renee came to the hospital. She held her niece for about 6 minutes and then handed her back carefully, the way someone handles something they know is precious and know they do not yet deserve to hold for long. I watched that. I filed it away. I am not the sister who absorbs things anymore. I am not the one who covers the missed payments and pretends not to notice and says yes because I'm afraid of what happens if I say no. I don't know exactly who I am yet in this new configuration, but I know that my daughter is going to grow up watching me, and I have decided she is going to watch me hold my ground. That's enough to start with. There's a version of that afternoon I used to replay where I said something, where I stood up in front of 80 guests and told my sister exactly what I thought of her. In that version, I was righteous and sharp, and everyone nodded, and she finally understood. I used to think that version would have felt better. It wouldn't have. I know that now. What actually happened? The quiet, the stillness, the decision I made at midnight with a laptop and a phone. That was the thing that changed something real. Not in Renee, not at first. In me. And I think that's where it always has to start. I spent a long time believing that being a good person meant absorbing. That patience was infinite if you just tried hard enough. That saying yes, even when yes cost you something, was the right thing because it kept the peace. I called that ethics. I called it being the bigger person. What it actually was, most of the time, was fear wearing a costume. The honest version is this. I kept Renee on my phone plan because I was afraid of what she'd say if I didn't. I co-signed her loan because I was afraid my mother would be disappointed if I refused. I smiled at events she ruined and accepted explanations I didn't believe because I had decided, somewhere in my early 20s, that my comfort was less important than everyone else's stability. That's not goodness. That's a coping mechanism with good PR. What I understand now, and what Renee's therapist said in a way that landed even secondhand, is that real care for someone does not mean removing all consequences from their life. It means letting them be a person who is capable of handling things. Every time I covered a missed payment without saying a word, I was telling Renee, silently, consistently, that I didn't believe she could manage her own life. That's not love. That's a quiet kind of condescension dressed up as loyalty. When she made that payment herself, after I stopped covering for her, she proved something, not to me, to herself. She had the money. She had always had the money. She just never had to find it before. That's the part that stays with me. The clarity to see a situation honestly, to understand what your actions are actually producing versus what you intend them to produce, that took me 30 years to develop, and I'm still working on it. It's uncomfortable work. It requires looking at your own behavior without the flattering story attached. I had a flattering story. I was the responsible one, the patient one, the sister who held things together. The story was true in the most surface sense, and it hid something I didn't want to see. What Renee did at my baby shower was inexcusable. But what I did in the years before it, enabling, absorbing, quietly resenting while outwardly accommodating, that created the conditions for her to believe she could do it. Not because I caused her behavior, she owns that, but because I had never once let her experience what happens when behavior like that has a cost. I think about what I want my daughter to see when she watches me navigate hard relationships. I want her to see someone who is honest about what's working and what isn't. Someone who makes decisions from a clear-eyed place rather than from old fear. Someone who understands that walking away from a dynamic that is damaging you is not cruelty. It is the kind of quiet, unglamorous courage that doesn't get celebrated but changes everything anyway. That's the thing I'm trying to build now, not the dramatic version of strength. The steady kind.